In today's video, we are going to celebrate Amiga's 40th birthday. We are going to restore and explore the A1000, the first Amiga, released by Commodore in June of 1985. The badge here doesn't say Amiga 1000, just Amiga. And that is of course because there were no other Amigas at the time. The Amiga 1000 is also the only machine that had the early checkmark logo. When the keyboard is not in use, it can be parked in the garage underneath the machine. What a nifty feature. I wish all my desktops had a garage like this. Aside from the badge and the garage, this machine also has a diskette drive on the front and a hidden expansion slot underneath this cover. We'll check inside it in a minute. At the back of the machine there is an RJ11 connector for the keyboard, parallel port and serial port. And then we have a connector here for an external disk drive. Left and right audio outs, RGB and composite. This connector here is for older TVs. But the proper way to use this machine is of course with RGB here. On the right side it has a connector for the mouse and a joystick. And underneath this cover here is an expansion slot, identical to the expansion slots in A500. On the left side it only has a power switch. And here we can also see the condition of this machine. It's pretty grimy. The case has yellowed from age, but it's not that bad. I've definitely had worse than this. I'm trying to make sense of this keyboard here. Some of the keys makes a rather pleasant clicky noise, but only some of them, and only occasionally. And the feel is actually pretty horrible. The Epic Amiga can't possibly have a keyboard this bad. So there must be something wrong with my keyboard. We'll explore it in detail later. The space bar and the cover has gone yellow, so I will leave it in peroxide while we restore the machine. Underneath the machine we have a sticker, and in tiny letters here is the only reference to Commodore, at least on the outside of the machine. PAL machines were manufactured in Germany, and NTSC machines were manufactured by Sanyo in Japan. Tucked in under the machine back here is also the IC connector. And apparently we're missing one foot. So I'll see if I can find a replacement. Underneath the machine I also found some screws. So we'll start by removing them. And apparently one screw is missing. So someone has been inside here. These look like Commodore 64 screws. In that case I have a replacement in my stash. Well, I can't find any more screws. So let's gently try with the spudger and see if that cover is loose. I'm probably being overly careful here, but I don't like to crack vintage plastics. And here comes the lid. Underneath the lid it says Rev A. And then we also have the signatures of the team behind the Amiga 1000. Actually, we even have the signature of Joe Pillow. That was the name given on the ticket for the extra airline seat, purchased to hold the first Amiga prototype, while on the way to the January 1984 Consumer Electronics Show. Underneath the lid it's completely covered in shields, so nothing interesting yet. Now let's see if we can remove that front panel. Okay, we have the RAM expansion card, that's good. Underneath here it also says Rev A, so this is a factory upgrade from 256K to 512. So this is a pretty useful upgrade. There probably are some aftermarket replacements. That's always nice with the original part. Okay, let's see if the rest of the front panel will come off now. I'm being super careful here. Probably unnecessarily. The case doesn't seem to have gone brittle. And after some fiddling it came off. Inside here it also says Rev A, and we have a couple of LEDs attached. Inside here we have another missing screw, so this shield has been out before. Well, the good thing so far is that I haven't seen any rust yet, so it seemed to have been stored well. Being 40-year-old, that can make a huge difference of the condition of the machine. Okay, about 15 screws later, I think we can remove the shield now. Yes. Oh, we've got the second PCB. So I think we have an early machine here. And same thing inside here, no rusts. I also see some ceramic chips in here. So definitely an early machine. Now let's see if we can disconnect the LEDs on the front panel. One for the disk drive. And presumably the power LED. Okay, so I think we'll start with the drive. It has two regular screws on this side. But then it's also held down with these strange custom standoffs on this side. Never seen standoffs quite like this before. Why not just use regular screws? Okay, there's actually one more regular screw back here. So far I'd say this case seems pretty well built. And here comes the drive. And sure enough, this is the first revision of the board. It's clearly marked Rev 6 here. I think there were 3 revisions of this board, and Rev 6 was the first revision. I'll check the manufacturing dates and put them on the screen here. But I think the Rev 6 here tells us that it's from the first year of production. Well, I guess we'll check some dates next. So these 4 MOS chips here are from week 30 of 1985. Same thing here, week 29 and week 30. These 2 Motorola chips here that are soldered to the board are from week 31 of 1985 and week 27, 85. So definitely first year of production. Awesome. That is what I was hoping for. We'll check some more chips in a minute. So the second PCB here, or Daughterboard if you will, was actually an afterthought. The OS was so buggy when they released this machine. They decided not to put it in ROMs. Instead you load Kickstart from a disk when you turn the machine on. Then it's loaded to 256K of RAM on this second PCB here. But I think they eventually solved the issue. So I think later machines don't have this PCB. And that is why I thought it was an early machine, which it clearly is. Now let's see if we can remove it. So we can check some more chips underneath. From what I can tell here, the motherboard seems to have pin headers and the daughterboard has sockets. So I think we can just pull that card off. But it's quite firmly attached, so I'm gonna have to be careful here. Well, I did some thinking here, and I think the proper way to do this is to use a prying tool made out of very soft plastic. And then gently pull the PCB out. A couple of millimeters on each set of pin headers. Since this tool is made out of soft plastics, it doesn't scratch the PCB. Yeah, I think that method worked quite well, because it's almost free now. Yep. It was a pretty scary experience actually. So on this side of the PCB, we've got these special sockets here. A whole bunch of logic here, and some RAM on this side here. I have to say, this machine is surprisingly clean inside. And here are those super long crazy pin headers. Nothing looks bent or damaged. So I think that was a pretty good way to disconnect that PCB. I imagine those later machines, without the daughterboard, probably just have the intended ICs instead of these pin headers. And these 2 sets of pads here are probably for the intended ROMs. I'll check this later. With the daughterboard removed, I was able to check every single chip on this board. And ironically enough, these 2 ceramic chips are the newest chips on this board. They are made in week 39 of 1985. So, by the looks of it, this machine was manufactured in September of 1985. The sticker on the power supply tells the same story. September of 1985. This power supply was made by the Viking Group Inc. Shindengen Electronic Manufacturing Company Ltd. Never heard of these guys. And by the looks of it, one of the previous owners had his coffee here while he was working on the machine. That's a bit ruthless, but I guess I'll keep the tradition alive. And the next obvious thing to remove, I guess, is the motherboard. Okay, and here comes the motherboard. And it seems to come out together with the panel at the back. The panel at the back also says Rev A, and it has yellowed quite severely, a lot more than the rest of the machine. so I'll leave it in peroxide too. Okay, and the last thing to come out, well, except for this cobweb here, is the power supply. And this part of the case is not quite as clean as the rest of the machine, so it definitely needs good cleaning. But there is actually something floating around here. A piece of metal. Here's one of the reasons why I always check inside the machine. That is new to me before I power it on. If this piece here was on the PCB, it could have shorted something and damaged some really expensive and hard to find chips. The motherboard has a large shield underneath. So let's unbend these tabs and remove it. And we'll see if this board had any repairs done to it. Okay, the shield dropped. Now let's take a look underneath the board. No, I don't see any rework here. So I don't think this board has ever been repaired. The only hand soldered component is this guy here. Not very likely to have ever been replaced. Took that rather strange looking drive out of the drive cage. Never seen one of these before. Apparently it's an NEC FD1035, also made in September of 1985. So the next thing we need to do is to check for nasty little refus and leaky caps inside the power supply. And my usual disclaimer, please don't mess around inside power supplies. Some of the caps inside could be charged with mains voltage, even with the cord unplugged. Okay, this is looking good. No refus, no bulging caps, and I don't see any electrolytes on the PCB. Awesome, but it's a bit smelly. That doesn't matter, it's going to be washed with everything else. And back here the power supply has a really chunky fan, made out of die-cast aluminium. That is a pretty serious fan, apparently running off mains voltage. Never heard of this brand, but it's made in Japan, so probably an awesome fan. The keyboard cord has come undone completely, so we're gonna have to restore it later. But first I'll clean it off camera with everything else. The mouse is absolutely disgusting, so it's going to get a bath too, in warm soapy water. Those are some pretty serious switches. They seem to be about twice the size of regular mouse switches. And apparently Mitsumi made this mouse. I was stupid enough to buy this machine without the mouse, so I had to buy this mouse separately. Date code looks to be 5/3, so possibly 1985 week 3. So that's a pretty good match for our machine here. Okay, next up we have that strange keyboard. So this key here made that faint clicky noise a couple of times, and then it stopped. I'll put the microphone closer in. Okay, this one keeps clicking. Very strange keyboard. The sticker back here is missing, if there ever was one. So no clues to who made it yet. Screws are also covered with these stickers. That's a first. I'll put these on double-sided tape for now, and later I'll cut around them. That way I will have fresh adhesive and it's time to put them back on. The keyboard also has spring-loaded flip-out feet, so I'm really curious to see what we will find inside here. Probably some really weird switches. Apparently it has some tabs too, not just those screws. Yep. Yeah, sure enough, one tab at the front here and one tab at the back. Well, everything looks okay in here. I'll pull some of those caps off. Okay, so we have individual switches here. And they are clicky. I guess I'll pull all the keycaps off and we'll take a look underneath. Okay, nothing too bad in here, but it's really dusty. So hopefully a good wash will make these switches behave normally again. Keycaps were a bit tricky to remove because the stabilizers are unusually firmly attached to the plate. So I decided to pull this bit here of each cap that had a stabilizer, instead of using more force to pull the stabilizer off the plate. because these guys came off very easily. So let's remove the shield next. Oh, there's an MOS chip here. Week 37 of 1985. Okay, so apparently we have a complete machine with all matching parts. Awesome. And back here we have a mylar sheet. I'm not sure I should remove it, because then I would have to replace this double-sided tape. Not a difficult thing, but kind of pointless. And we've got a logo on the keyboard here that I'm not familiar with. I think it says AOYUE. I'll check on Google. And as you can imagine, that was an impossible search term on Google. So that's gonna have to remain a mystery. Well, that was actually the complete disassembly. I'll wash and retrobite all the parts, and then we'll continue. Okay, it's the next day here. Everything has been washed or treated with peroxide. And the keyboard mystery here is partially solved. The logo here that we checked out earlier are not actually the characters EYE, because these guys here are actually Japanese characters. So this is in fact a Mitsumi keyboard. So these weird switches here are actually Mitsumi switches. To be more specific, these are Mitsumi standard mechanical type 2 switches. But the mystery remains. Why are some of these making a clicky sound, but some don't? And some of them only occasionally. This doesn't make any sense to me. And the worst part of this is that they are extremely scratchy. I'll put the microphone very close to the switch and I'll see if I can capture it. So they don't just sound scratchy, they also feel very scratchy. And since this is my only Amiga 1000 keyboard, I obviously don't know if they are normal or if this keyboard is a bit worn. The only thing I can think of is to try with some deoxit. So this switch here continuously makes a clicky sound, and it is as scratchy as all the other switches. So let's do an experiment. I'll place some drops of deoxit all the way around the stem, and then I'm going to push it down a bunch of times and see what happens. Okay, quite quickly it got way less scratchy. It's still scratchy, but not as bad. And it stopped making that clicky sound. I'll put the microphone close in and hopefully you can hear the difference. So that was actually a significant improvement. As an experiment here, I gave the numpad the same treatment and all the switches stopped making the clicky noise and they feel a lot less scratchy. So this is what we'll do. I'll use this keyboard as it is right now and see how it feels to use. But we are most likely going to get back to this keyboard in the future, because if it doesn't get any better from use, it definitely needs a mod to be enjoyable to use. The paint on this barrel plate is absolutely awful. As you can see, it's all coming off, and it has started to rust in some spots. But the only way to clean it and respray it is to desolder every single switch on this keyboard. And I am actually considering it. But that's not a promise quite yet. But it is actually quite likely that we will get back to this keyboard in a separate video and do a restoration. Well, this is not really what deoxit is for. My hope here was that the deoxit would find its way down into the switch and reach the contacts. And if they had any corrosion on them, it would clean them off. But since it made such a significant difference, I actually ended up treating all the switches the same way. And in doing so I found 2 sticky switches, and the deoxit actually fixed them too. So this is just a temporary fix, and we'll see where we go from here after I have used this keyboard for a while. The keyboard is really well shielded. It has a shield that wraps all the way around the keyboard. And unfortunately 2 of the switches are broken. Check out this guy here. The stem is cracked. So when the keycap is installed and I push on it, it stays down. That sucks. So I'm gonna have to try to source 2 new switches. This keyboard is definitely gonna have to come back in another video. Well, that sucks. But hey, at least now the spacebar looks great. It took a few hours in cream peroxide and some sunshine, and all the keycaps cleaned up really nicely. So now at least it looks really good. And same thing with the case. It turned out great. And to finish the keyboard off, I need to reinstall the badge with some fresh adhesive. That is a nice looking badge for sure. In fact, this whole keyboard looks really good. I'm not sure about those switches yet, but it's definitely a looker. Actually, there is one more thing we need to do with this keyboard. That's the cord. It looks absolutely horrible. This thing looks like crap. So we need to fix it. We could replace it with an aftermarket cord, but I want to keep as many of the original parts as possible. So let's fix it instead. And the way to fix a cord is to coil it around a thick metal rod. Tape it at both ends, then apply heat, being careful not to melt it. And then I'm going to let it cool down and reapply heat several times. Okay, said and done. Let's remove that tape and check. Yeah, not bad. Not bad at all. That is definitely good enough for me. We could do this a bunch more times if you want to make it more tight, but this is good enough for me. The tank mouse cleaned up really nicely too, and strangely enough it hadn't yellowed like my other tank mice. But before I reassemble it, I'm going to leave a few drops of deoxit inside those switches. They are put together with plastic rivets, so I can't take them apart. All I can do is to hope that the deoxit will reach the contacts inside. And we have finally reached my favorite part of the project, the reassembly. Nice and clean parts. That's a really snug fit. By the way, I couldn't get those coffee stains off. I find it quite ironic that this Amiga has been sitting in a corner here in the studio for ages. And then I managed to pick the exact month to do the birthday restoration. So back in 1985, when this machine came out, I was just a kid and I had a Commodore 64. And when the Amiga came out, it was this crazy expensive machine. It was so way out of my reach. I never even dreamt of owning one. But I wasn't really complaining either. I only knew 2 other kids who had a Commodore 64. So I considered myself a very lucky C64 owner. It's actually a pretty easy machine to disassemble and reassemble. I've definitely had worse. Oh crap, I spoke too soon. The power LED connects underneath the shield. So I'm gonna have to remove all these screws again. Okay, with the power LED connected, let's try that again. Before we put that panel back on, let's reinstall those badges. That's a nice looking logo. I wonder why they changed it. Now let's fix that tiny scratch with a Sharpie. Yeah, that's perfect. The design of the eject button is very questionable. It looks extremely fragile, but it's not broken, so we're all good. The cable for the LED was stuck down with some tape here, but there is actually a perfect spot for a zip tie here, so it only makes sense to use one. And the retrobrite process went really well. I'm sure the color isn't perfect, but that's not what it's all about, is it? Nice enough to be enjoyable to use. That's good enough for me. And the result definitely is good enough. And the only thing left to put back on now is the lid. I have to say, this is a really good looking machine. I guess it looks kind of friendly and inviting to play some games on. Okay, I went through my stash and I found an analog RGB cable. So we can put that LCD panel aside and instead use a matching display. I'll start with a cleaning disc and turn the machine on. Okay, the fan spun up. And as we already guessed, that is a nice and silent, fancy Japanese fan. Okay, the drive is making seeking noise. but it's not spinning up. Let's turn that display on, see what's going on. Oh yes! Haha! It works! Awesome! Well, at least partially. So unlike all other Amigas, this one here is asking for a kickstart diskette. Since, well, as I mentioned earlier, it was too buggy to ship with the machine. So let's insert kickstart 1.2. Oh no, it still makes that clicky noise. It doesn't read a disk. Okay, I connected an external diskette drive, but I actually don't know if it works. That goes for the diskette too. Let's turn the machine on and see what happens. Well, the drive in the machine still makes that ticking noise. And this drive here isn't doing anything. Well, maybe this machine has to boot from the internal drive. I honestly don't know. Oh, something just happened. It decided to read from that disk. Oh yes, it worked. And now it's asking for the workbench diskette. So let's swap that disk. Oh yes, it works. So that drive just needed to wake up after a very long sleep. I have actually had this happen before, especially with PS2 drives. After a restoration they won't spin up, but with a little bit of patience they suddenly just spin up, and they have been working since. And I just noticed my stupid camera can actually sync to this refresh rate. So no flickering. Now this drive started to make some noises, so let's insert diskette here and see if it works. This drive obviously needs restoration, and it's not really intended for this machine. But since we have it on the bench, yeah, totally works. Awesome. Well, you guys know me. We're gonna upgrade the crap out of this machine. And I actually think we're gonna go pretty crazy with this one, if I can find all the components. So like, subscribe and leave a comment, and I'll start ordering PCBs and components. And I'll see you guys again next week.